This is Deathing, an office-themed roguelike that I started working on more than 2 years ago, and although it's changed a lot since then, there is one thing that has stayed consistent throughout, and that's the game's genre. Whether it's me saying it in the first couple seconds of every video, or me putting it in basically every title, I've been advertising this game as a roguelike since the very start. But as I've come to realise, that might have been a mistake, because when I chose this genre 2 years ago, I failed to realise one very important thing. I don't like roguelikes. I've never liked them. It's not a genre I enjoy playing. Even the game that I've been using as the inspiration for this project, Enter the Gungeon, I have less than 10 hours in. I think it's a fine game, but I don't love it, and it took me way too long to realise how much me not liking roguelikes has been hurting this game. For example, I've been really struggling to come up with fun gameplay, and if you consider that I don't even like the genre of the gameplay I'm trying to make, it's no surprise I was struggling. So over the past month, I've completely let go of the roguelike label and have just been focusing on trying to make a game that I would actually enjoy playing. And here's how it went. I started by making a very simple office environment. I mean, it's literally just a square, but like I said, very simple. I then added some smaller yellow squares that I put on the edges of the bigger square and implemented an old procedural generation script, which allows us to now walk from square to square. And even though technically this is now a fully generated environment, it doesn't actually feel like you're going anywhere. And that's because there's nothing to indicate where you are. It's just one giant void. So to try and fix that, I started working on a minimap. Now, I have no idea if there's an easier way to do this, but what I did was generate a second, smaller version of the office using simple white squares that I put at like y-1000 in our scene. I then aimed a camera at it and turned that into an overlay camera, and now technically speaking we have a minimap, only it's covering the entire screen and not actually showing where we are, which is pretty essential. So I limited it to a small space in the corner and made the room you're currently in green. And although this is basically all we need, I also wanted to show where you've already been and where you can still go. So I made rooms that you haven't visited yet completely invisible, and rooms that you can currently go to slightly transparent. Then once you actually visit a room, it'll turn white to indicate that you've now been there. And as a final detail, I also added these connections between rooms to show whether two rooms are actually connected to each other by a door or not. And this is looking really good. It shows you where you are, where you can go, and where you've been. But it only does so for like a couple rooms, since the minimap is, well, mini. So to solve this, I also added a full-sized map that you can view by pressing tab. This map shows you every single room that you've discovered and every single room that you can still go to. And for some reason, just having a map like this actually makes the environment feel much more real. I don't really know why, but suddenly it feels like I'm actually walking through a real space, even if it literally is just a couple squares. But you might actually be wondering why I'm even making this to begin with. We're no longer making a roguelike, so why do we need a procedural environment? Well, let me explain it to you. Previously, the idea was that you'd start at the first floor of the office and you would try to fight your way all the way to the top. Then when you die at any point, you get sent all the way back down to the bottom and you try again, repeating that cycle over and over. But the new idea is a little different. We still have a randomly generated office and you still start at the bottom, but at the end of every floor you get a choice. Do you want to stay and continue on to the next floor, or do you want to leave and return to your base? Now, I'll explain more about this base thing later, but the important thing is that instead of then having to start all the way back from the bottom again, you can choose to re-enter the office at any floor you've already visited. And not only that, you can bring all of your gear with you back into the office. The only twist is that when you do die, you lose everything you took with you. This creates a really interesting risk-reward situation. Do you take your best gear and risk it all to be able to defeat better enemies and get even better gear, or do you take some worthless junk with you, not risking anything, but making the combat significantly harder for yourself? I think this is way more interesting than just losing everything always when you die. Instead, now you get to choose what you're willing to lose. So I hope that kind of gives you an idea of what we're going to be doing differently with the game going forward, and it also explains why we do still need the procedural environment, even if we're not making a roguelike. Anyway, with this very basic environment done, it's time to start adding some new stuff to the game. And the first thing I want to add is something gun related. However, the only gun we have right now is not exactly subtle. It's basically a giant shotgun, and I'd like something a little bit more simple for this. So I designed a new gun. Now I'm still trying to kind of figure out the art style I want to use for the guns in this game, so for this one I tried something new. It's supposed to look like a weird prototype computer-esque gun, and I don't think it looks terrible, but I definitely love to get some feedback on the design. However, when it comes to the gameplay, it's just about as simple as it can get. It shoots one regular sized bullet at a very standard fire rate. Basically, it's the perfect gun for the next thing we're going to make, which are mods. Now, the way these mods are going to work is actually pretty basic. For example, you'll be able to equip a mod that adds fire rate to your weapon, and now you can shoot faster. Or you can equip a mod that increases your weapon's damage or projectile speed, basic things like that. But I'd also like to include some weirder ones, like a mod that turns all your bullets into exploding chickens, or one that makes every projectile 3 times their original size, just silly things like that. However, if we want to be able to do all of those things, we're going to need a good, robust system that can actually handle it. Which means we first of all need a way to store all of the information about the mod in one single place. And luckily Unity has a great thing for that called scriptable objects. In here we can store information like the mod's name, description, visuals, and everything else we need. Then when we need to know something about a specific mod, we simply ask the scriptable object for that information. And although this is literally all we need for a simple mod that, for example, adds damage, it's not going to be enough for a mod with more complicated behavior. For that, we're going to have to use custom scripts, because in those I can adjust literally anything I want, and all I need for them to work is attach them to a gun object. But this was actually more complicated than I thought it would be. After all, I attach scripts to objects all the time, but doing so when the game is running isn't actually that easy, because although I can put a script reference in my mod, that only works for one specific script, but I need to be able to attach literally any script I want to my gun. So I tried solving this for literal days, and it turned out to actually be quite a difficult task. But the thing that solved it eventually was this piece of code from a random stranger on the internet, because what it does is it converts the name of the script in the form of a string to a component type that I can actually attach to an object, which means that all I need in my mod is the name of the script and the game can figure it out from there. And of course, by the game can figure it out, I mean the mod manager that took me multiple hours to write can figure it out. But at least now we have the ability to make fully functional mods. However, currently the only way we can do so is to manually type the mod ID into the gun's mod manager, which obviously I can't be doing during the game. So I made a quick and very temporary mod menu where we can activate certain mods during runtime. And the 3 mods I just made to test are Blackout, which increases your fire rate and damage, but also completely blacks out your guns and bullets, the Flash, which doubles your bullet speed, and Chunky, that increases your bullet size. And combining all of those together, we get something that looks nothing like the basic gun we had before. Now, I do also want to clarify that these mods are not well thought out or balanced, and there's a good chance they won't be in the final game. They're just meant to test the system. For now though, it seems everything is working, which means we can move on to the next thing we're making, which is your base. Now, the way you get to your base is by finding an elevator, but because we haven't made those yet, for now we're going to have these 2 squares. The green one will take you to the next floor, and the red one will take you down to your base. But then what exactly do you do at this base? Well, honestly, I don't really know. Okay, that's not entirely true. I know that I want you to be able to place certain things here to help upgrade your gear, represented by these triangles. But then what exactly those things do, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe one allows you to change the mods on your weapon, and another one could make your mods better, or you could have a machine that increases your health. The possibilities are practically endless. But besides having those kind of things here, this will also be the place that NPCs go after you help them in the office, which now now that I mention it, yes, this game is going to have a lot of NPCs. I mentioned before that Enter the Gungeon has been a huge inspiration for this game, and one of my favourite moments in that game is when I discovered that there was a little guy in the elevator shaft. That gave me a quest to get it certain items in order to unlock the elevator to that floor, and it was NPC interactions like that that I enjoyed most about that game, and so I want to implement things like that into my own game as well. Now obviously this is still very much in the idea phase, and I don't know how it's practically going to work, but I'm sure I'll figure it out. For now though, let's get back to actually making stuff. Now one thing I learned making my last video is that I really struggle to see how good something really is when it doesn't look good, and currently the game really doesn't look good. So if we want to continue making the game, we're going to need to add some visuals. Luckily, I already made a full tile map months ago, so all we need to do is add that to the game, turn it into a rule tile, and use that to make a much better looking room. I think it took like 15 minutes, and the difference is insane. I also spent a little bit of extra time adding a couple small details to help break things up, like these pillars against the wall and a random cup of coffee on the floor, which just make things look a little bit less boring. Now, I also made these sprites for the base, but I do want to note that they too are incredibly temporary and will be replaced by much better versions down the road, because I mean, look at it, this one is literally just a Minecraft chest. So yeah, we'll definitely be replacing those in the future. For now though, we can get back to working on the gameplay, specifically the combat. Now luckily we made a pretty good enemy last video, so we can just pop that into the game. But because it wouldn't be fun if you had to fight this thing every single time you enter the new room, I gave the enemy a 25% chance of spawning. This means that going through an entire floor, it'll spawn roughly 2 or 3 times, which for the very basic prototype we're making is more than enough. I also made it so that when you enter a room with an enemy in it, the doors disable themselves until the room is cleared, so you can't leave until you actually defeat the enemy. Now all of this seems really good, but there's one glaring issue, and you might have actually been able to spot it, because currently the player doesn't get hit. Even when the enemy is spot on and the cabinets hit the player straight in the face, nothing happens, and that's because I haven't written any code for it. So I spent a little while making both a hitbox and a hurtbox script. I've then attached the hitbox to the cabinets and the hurtbox to the player, and now the player can get hit. But you still can't tell because nothing happens. Sure, you're losing health, but there's no visual feedback. So to fix that, I added both some screen shake and made the game freeze for like 0.1 seconds whenever you get hit, and this gives some really nice feedback and makes it very clear what happened. But you might also notice that the player becomes transparent for a short moment, and this is because I also gave the player about half a second of invincibility whenever they get hit, which is then communicated by lowering the transparency. This means you can't get hit twice within a short period of time, and also fixes any accidental double hits caused by overlapping hitboxes. Now there's still a lot more stuff I want to add, specifically when it comes to enemies dropping stuff when killed, but before we can actually get to that, this video is sponsored by Milanote. Now for those who don't know what Milanote is, it's a tool to help organize your creative projects, and you might actually recognize it from my last video where I was using it to lay out a bunch of different enemy ideas, and that's because I genuinely use Milanote. In fact, it's been a huge improvement to my game's development. For example, this is where I used to keep track of my ideas for the game, a single page Google Doc that I think I wrote in like 10 minutes and then maybe looked at once. But now this is where I keep track of my ideas, and not only do I finally feel motivated to actually write down my thoughts and ideas on the game, I also go back to them very often, either to remind myself my plans are or to update them with new ideas. But even just the act of putting everything together like this has already been really beneficial to me. That's because it forces me to think about the game very differently than I do in my head. A great example of that is this board, where I laid out pretty much the entire gameplay loop, because even though the goal originally was just to give me an overview of the gameplay, working on it actually helped me improve the game a lot, because in trying to put all of this together, I was forced to think about every aspect of the game and how it all interacts with each other, which resulted in me coming up with entirely new mechanics, which I'll actually be talking about later in this video. Now, in case it isn't clear yet, I think Milanote is great, and I definitely think you should be using it for your projects. But even so, I haven't even told you the best part yet. It's completely free. You can sign up right now and start using it this very second. No free trial, no credit card, no nothing. You just make an account and you're done. So whether you're working on your dream game, or you've just started a small project, maybe you even have a game jam coming up, I highly recommend you just try Milanote. See if you like it and if it helps you develop and organize your game, and if not, no harm done. So if you do want to give it a go, go to milanote.com/Deynum or click the link in the description to sign up for a free account and start using Milanote today. Thank you so much to Milanote for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. Okay, so whenever you kill an enemy, it will of course have a chance of dropping stuff. But what exactly will that stuff be? I think it's pretty obvious it'll have a chance of dropping the mods we made earlier, but what else? Now, you might actually already know the answer, because there's a chance you saw it in the sponsored segment earlier, because in this board lining out the mechanics of the game, there are two things that I haven't talked about yet: resources and boosts. Now, resources seem pretty self-explanatory. They're things like coins, wood, paper, ink, coffee, or whatever other resources I can come up with. But boosts might need a little bit more clarification. Basically, they're just like mods, but more powerful, apply to the player instead of a specific weapon, and most importantly, are temporary. But what exactly does that mean? Well, let's take this boost as an example. If you pick it up, you get an increase of 50% to your movement speed. And as long as you keep playing and continue your run, you'll keep this 50% boost. But if at any point you decide to leave the office and go back to your base, the boost will be lost entirely. The point of this is that you're rewarded for doing longer runs and taking more risk. As you get more boosts the longer you play, and the more boosts you have, the more powerful you become. Now, most likely there will be some kind of cap on the amount of boosts you can have active at once, but even so, this system should make the decision on whether to stay or leave much more interesting. Okay, so now it's time to put all of this together. So I started by making the enemy drop these little things. Do I know what they are? No, not really. It might be a currency or a resource. It doesn't really matter. It's just something you can collect to earn points. And to be able to see how many points you have, I made a temporary counter at the top of your screen. This means the game has temporarily become a high score game, giving you some kind of purpose when playing it. I then started working on a drop system for the mods and boosts, since they need an adjusted drop percentage based on things like rarity and enemy type. So what I did is I gave the enemy a certain chance to drop a mod or a boost. For this enemy specifically, it's 20%. Then if that 20% hits, it drops a random mod or a random boost. Later on, this will also be influenced by mod and boost rarity, but right now they're all standard, which is the lowest one, so it doesn't really matter. And with that done, I've officially made the most basic version of this game that I can possibly make, which is a good thing, by the way. I might have made it sound like that was a bad thing, but no, that's really, really good. It means we are finally somewhere. Now granted, that somewhere is the first step of a long journey ahead of us, but still, it's somewhere. So if you want to see where this game is headed next, feel free to subscribe, and if you haven't seen any other videos on this game, you can click here to watch another one. For now though, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.